Some games come out totally great but just don't hit mainstream popularity. Others sell well but still not quite enough for their big corporate expectations. So today we're taking a look at 5 best current gen games that were technically considered financial failures. Keep in mind, a lot of this is up to a little bit of interpretation. We used what sales data we could come across for these titles, and we also used quotes from higher ups in these companies. VG Charts is not a reliable source for numbers, so we've kind of had to work around that, and this is what we've came up with. There are more examples out there, so we're looking forward to hearing from you guys. But anyway, let's get started off with number 5 and talk about Gravity Rush 2. This was a follow-up to the cult hit Gravity Rush. Honestly, one of the better games to grace the PlayStation Vita. Rest in peace, my dude. But with a full-fledged sequel that was bigger and better and unshackled from a portable release onto the big bad PS4, you'd expect this game to really find its time to shine and take off, right? Well, unfortunately, not quite. Despite being a pretty great game, we enjoyed it in our Before You Buy video, Gravity Rush 2 just didn't click with mainstream audiences and find a crowd bigger than the one that already really existed. Now, shout out to the Gravity Rush fanbase. They're dedicated and just all around great. They're great to the point where user Draken tried to define how much this game actually sold, since publicly available numbers were pretty shaky. Now, it didn't hit any sales charts around the world, except for Japan and France, and it also never hit any of the top 20 download lists on PSN, even after launch. Now, looking at in-game ranking charts, the fan has estimated a rough number of 168,868 that own the game, thanks to the data in leaderboard rankings. Now, it's likely higher because some people may not have connected to the internet, but that's still not a very big number, and that's a bummer. As of right now, there's no known plans for a sequel, and the game's financial performance is likely the reason why. But next, over at number 4, Knack 2. Yeah, let's talk about this one. Look, the first one was a harmless game, but it was a launch game for PS4 and a simple one that just didn't really make waves. Still, seemed like Sony and Mark Cerny were committed to making another one. We weren't sure how many people really wanted it, and that was apparent to a lot of people considering Knack 2 turned into this big giant meme. You probably remember that. I hope you remember that. It wasn't that long ago. But still, man, I gotta point out, Knack 2 is an improved game in every way. It actually is a really fun time, and it's a bit more in-depth compared to the shallow original game. We made it Before You Buy on this one, and we're surprised just how much we liked it. Yeah, it's for kids. Yes, it's not the most compelling thing, but it was solid, and it had really good co-op. All we had to go on, really, is some Japanese sales data that can give us a rough idea of its reception. Its first week, it sold 2,600 copies. 2,600. That's considered paltry for a Sony game. Now, on UK sales charts, it hit number 12. And as far as we can find, it didn't even crack the top 10 NPD upon launch. Really, we look at what seems to be the performance of Knack 2 as a bummer, because at the rate Knack games were progressing, Knack 3 could have been even better. And I'm not memeing, I'm being serious about that. But let's move on. Next at number 3, this one's hard to talk about because it's a little tricky. We have Quantum Break. This is another title that did do pretty good critically, but suffered from some not so great sales, at least according to its big corporate overlord. It's another one that comes up often and is considered a quote-unquote flop by many gamers, but it's not as bad as it sounds. Remedy's time-bending shooter was actually pretty different. You play as Jack, who had the ability to manipulate and bend time, and the gameplay mechanics where you're like messing with time are actually pretty unique and did a good job making you feel powerful and like you were actually controlling time. They also filmed a mini show to go along with the game as well, like a real-life television show with real-life actors. Yeah, it was kind of cheesy, but you gotta give props to Remedy for trying something different. It had a pretty strong launch week, but after that, sales weren't too great, and even after leaving the Windows Store and being made available on Steam a while later, it didn't do insanely well. The game didn't quote-unquote bomb, but its sales were pretty poor for a big exclusive title, especially considering the likely expensive television production that the game also had. So while we don't know exactly how bad the game did, we do in fact know that Microsoft told Remedy that there wouldn't be a sequel. In a 2018 interview with GamesIndustry.biz, he said, and I quote, "Considering our history, Alan Wake was really interesting, but it was a collaboration with Microsoft. Due to certain reasons, it never got a sequel. Quantum Break, also, we put a lot of effort into creating the world, the characters, the stories, but it was Microsoft IP, and they decided not to take it further." He then went on to allude to wanting to make a sequel to both Quantum Break and Alan Wake if it were up to Remedy. Rights change hands all the time, ownership-wise. Look at Alan Wake. Remedy now has ownership of that again just recently. So you never know what could happen. It doesn't seem like Microsoft is interested in a Quantum Break 2, but maybe that'll see the light of day one day if Microsoft gives it up. Next at number 2, 2016's Deus Ex Mankind Divided had a weird lead up to launch, and although I thought it was decent, not as cool as Human Revolution, it reviewed well and people seemed to respond to it decently enough. It looked damn good and played better with a bunch of new abilities and systems added on from the previous game's base. Still, its opening week of sales, according to analysts, didn't reach the heights of the previous game. There are, of course, different factors for that, but the resulting sales trajectories, even after the first few weeks, seem to have led Square Enix to rethink the Deus Ex franchise that they had been investing so heavily in. It has been moved aside for the foreseeable future to make room for other games in Square Enix's lineup. Now, a lot of people were rumoring and reporting that the next Deus Ex game had been outright cancelled, but Square Enix heads came out and refuted that. Still, I don't know, the reports of it being put on hiatus do sound fairly credible. Regardless, I also want to point out that there's a 5-year gap between Human Revolution and Mankind Divided, so think on that. Maybe it's not as bad as it sounds. But the whole, and I quote, world of Deus Ex concept that Square Enix set up and announced and teased this whole arc for might have been reevaluated judging by the tone of the Square Enix higher-ups. They've admitted that their sales expectations for these games and the Tomb Raider franchise at the time were too high. So we can't really blame the game on this one, can we? But now, finally, at number 1, Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. This is probably the best game on this list, and the most unfortunate considering the situation. Obsidian's Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire was absolutely awesome. We did a before you buy on this one. It had cool expanded systems over the previous game, a large world, interesting story and characters, and of course some damn good classic RPG style systems that gave the game tons of variety and options. Still, the game's sales were considered, and I quote, below expectations. According to one investor who had put money into the game via Fig, the math from dividends received from investments after launch show that after the first month, the game sold roughly 110,000 units. The game didn't hit its break-even sales goal via Fig, and that's a damn shame. It was also retweeted by a prolific former Obsidian team member, too. So these aren't exact confirmations, but it's worth talking about. Fans still loved it, and we certainly did, but sometimes these types of games don't exactly take the mainstream world by storm. And I'd like to think that Obsidian wasn't naive to that fact. They've made these types of games before. It's a highly specific genre, and it wasn't really advertised too much. Still, again, the game was really good, and we're glad it exists, and you should still go play it. And that's really the theme for this video. Games that were considered financial failures or didn't meet expectations or didn't hit sales goals, what have you, stuff like that. We don't always get exact sales numbers, but we take a gauge. So we want to hear from you guys down in the comments. Any other games that it seems like you thought didn't sell very well, but the game was actually pretty good and deserved more. Let us know in the comments. We want to hear from you guys because there's a lot to talk about. And if you enjoyed this video, clicking the like button is the best way you can help us out. We really appreciate that. And if you're new, consider subscribing and hitting that notification button because we put out videos every single day. But, as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.